Okay, welcome everyone to our last session in task 1. In today's lesson, we will talk about how to describe information in a table or a bar chart, how to select and compare key features of charts and tables, and also we will talk one more time about cohesive devices or language. We will talk about, most importantly in this lesson, about how you can answer task 1 question that has 2 charts. So let's begin, and inshallah from next lesson, from next writing lesson, we'll be talking about essays, inshallah. So now let's begin let's begin with the marking criteria. You will be assessed in 4 areas: task achievement, coherence and cohesion, lexical resource, and grammatical range and accuracy. Task achievement, it's about how well you answer the question, including identifying the key features. This is very important. You need to talk about the most important features in maybe the table, in the bar chart, in the pie chart, and so on. Coherence and cohesion, of course, this is also very important. It's how the text is organized and how ideas are connected together logically to make it easy to follow. It has to do with the correct and varied use of linking words and referencing words. You can use, we are going to talk about that in this lesson, inshallah. You can use a pronoun to refer back to something you said before, okay? Coherence and cohesion in general, they are about how your text is organized. Are you talking about, if you have, for example, if you have 2 charts, are you talking about the first one first, then the second one after that, or you are jumping from one to the other and so on in your report? Okay, so this is coherence and cohesion. Lexical resource, it's the range of precision about the vocabulary you are using in your report. And of course, grammatical range and accuracy, it has to do with using different grammatical structures and using them correctly, obviously. Okay, so these are the 4 marking criteria. Okay, so now let's talk about tables. We talked about the pie chart, the bar chart before, and the graphs, but you can get a table. Your question could be about a table. The table gives information about the number of deep mines producing coal in the UK between 1913 and 2015. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So this is the table. It begins with the year 1913 and ends with the year 2015. It's almost a century. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, when you get such a question, you have to ask yourself some questions about the table itself, like what's the general trend in these figures? A declining trend in the numbers of mines. It's declining. It begins with over 3,000 and ends with 5 after 100 years. So this is a declining trend. Which years of time periods would you focus on as the most salient? It's 1913 to 1943. The numbers of mines almost halved. Okay, so you have to ask yourself some questions before you start writing anything. Okay, because if you don't ask yourself these questions, you are not able to identify the key features of the table. So which years of time periods would you focus on as the most salient, the most noticeable? Okay, it's from 1913 to 1947. The numbers of mines almost halved. It was over 3,000. Now it's almost the half. I mean, in the year 1943, not now, as in 2021. From 1963 to 1983, about 80% of mines closed. Okay, can you see the number declining? And it ends with very few minds left. So these are the key features that you want to report. Okay. Here we have a note. Most table and bar chart based task 1 questions will ask you either to describe changes over time or compare 2 or more sets of information. You can get 2 graphs, maybe a table and a bar chart, maybe 2 graphs and so on. Okay. Sometimes you might have to do both. The language you need will vary depending on the type of task. We are going to talk about that. Okay, so this is the first answer that we have for the table. The table shows the number of deep coal mines in the UK between 1913 and 2015. Obviously, there is a decline over the period. We can say that coal mines almost disappeared and there were only 5 left in 2015. So this is our introduction. In 1913, there were 3,024 deep coal mines, but this number began to decrease. The number of mines fell sharply and consistently over subsequent years. Nevertheless, in 1943, there were 1,690 mines left. This means that in a period of 30 years, the number of mines had almost halved. By 1963, this figure had virtually halved again. So this is our first paragraph of the answer. As you can see, it's a good answer, but there are some problems. We are going to talk about these problems later on. Surprisingly, in the 80s, we see another huge reduction with the number falling to around 20% of 1963 levels. By the time the current century began, there had been another decrease. In 2003, the number of deep mines producing coal dropped to 20, as you can see in 2003. At last, okay, this is a problem. We don't use at last here. We see that there are only 5 mines left. This is the second paragraph. In conclusion, there was a decreasing trend in mining. I'm sorry, this is minding. No, it's a mistake. It should be mining in Britain for the duration of the period shown in the chart. So now there are some good points about this report and some weaknesses. Regarding the good points, the strengths of the essay, task achievement is good. The description is accurate and there is data to support the description. So task achievement, it's good. About coherence and cohesion, overall structure makes sense with logical paragraphing. You started with the introduction, then one paragraph, the second paragraph, and conclusion. The ideas follow smoothly, so it's fine. Regarding lexical resource, a fairly good range of vocabulary is used to avoid repetition. So we don't have repetition here. About GRA, it's grammatical range and accuracy. Past tenses are generally used correctly, but it could be better, it could be improved. The weaknesses, some of the cohesion is faulty, obviously, nevertheless, surprisingly, and at last are used incorrectly here. So these words, we use cohesive devices to connect ideas between sentences, even in the same sentence and between paragraphs. Okay, so these words, obviously, nevertheless, surprisingly, and at last are used incorrectly. Also, we have something else. A wide range of linkers, cohesive language could be used. And instead of these previously mentioned words or cohesive devices. For example, we're referring to time periods. In plus here is almost always used to introduce the information. As you can see, in 1940, let's begin from the start in 2015, in 1913, in 1943, by 1963, in 2003. Okay, so we could use some other expressions instead of the N plus year language or expression. Okay, so we are going to talk about that now. Okay, I want you to pause the video and read this short essay or the report as many times as you want, and try to find alternatives to these expressions, these cohesive devices. Obviously, nevertheless, surprisingly, and at last. Okay. For example, could we use finally and instead of at last? Surprisingly, the writer is surprised. Why? He's reporting data. He's reporting changes in numbers of minds, in the number of minds. So why he is surprised? Okay. So I want you to pause the video now and try to find alternatives to these cohesive devices. Okay. Now we have a better use of cohesive devices. For example, for the first one, it says here, obviously, we used something different. We used the clear trend in the figures is that. So this expression is used to connect your ideas. Okay, the clear trend. There is a clear trend in the figures, in the numbers. Okay, that is, there is a decline over the period. Okay, so the clear trend here is a decline. We don't say obviously in reporting data. When you report, when you write your report about this visual data, you don't say obviously. Okay, you need to describe, you need to write something that explains what you mean. So don't say obviously. Okay, the clear trend in the figures is that there is a decline over the period. So this is used instead of the obviously cohesive device. Okay. Then we have here, nevertheless. If we read the sentence, in 1913, there were 3,024 deep coal mines, but this number began to decrease. The number of mines fell sharply and consistently over subsequent years. I want to give you an example. So I should use, for example, in 1943, okay, there were this number of mines left, okay, 1,690 mines left. So I'm giving you an example from the data. So I should use, for example, I should use a cohesive device that gives an example. Of course, the most obvious one, for example, for instance, and so on. Okay. Here we have surprisingly. It could be replaced with it's striking that in the 80s we see another huge reduction with the number falling to around 20%. Okay. One of the most obvious problems that we encounter in I mean with the students, the incorrect use of cohesive devices. It's like every sentence has a cohesive device that's used incorrectly. Okay, so it's not that you try to use many cohesive devices, it's how you are using them in your report. Okay, and the last one here we have at last. We shouldn't say at last. By the end of the period shown in 2015, by the end of the period shown in the table, it's not at last. Okay, it's by the end of the period shown in the table, in the visual data. Okay, so this is an improved version of the report using cohesive devices. Okay, this is a second answer for the same. Of course, obviously, it's a better answer for the same table. The data shows how many deep coal mines were in operation. Note the language used here. In the UK, at various points in the 100-year period between, of course, this is a compound adjective, between 1913 and 2015. The overall trend is clearly one of decline. So the language is much better than the previous one. Is clearly one of decline. We're going to talk about this expression in a minute. In fact, by the end of the given time frame, deep mines had almost ceased to operate in the UK. So this is another useful expression, ceased to operate, okay, or exist, and so on. In the early decades of the 20th century, there were still thousands of coal mines in Britain. To give a specific example, okay, this is much better than saying, for example, to give a specific example. Now I'm going to give you a specific example from the visual data. There were 3,024 of them still operational in 1913. Here we have of them. We are going to talk about this expression too. However, the process of closing down the UK's deep mines had clearly begun. By 1923, the number had fallen to 2,607. By the middle of the century, this is another useful expression. I'm not using in 1943, in 1963, in 1983. Okay, so I'm using different expressions. Okay, in the early decades of the 20th century. So this is used instead of the 1913 and 1923. This is better language, better expressions. Okay. And here we have, by the middle of the century, it was apparent that the days of British coal mining were numbered. In 1963, the figure fell below 1,000 for the first time. One of the most striking features of this table is that the deterioration of Britain's coal mining industry accelerated even further in the 80s and was almost complete by the turn of the 21st century. So, by the turn of the 21st century. Can you see the difference in the language used? Okay, so this is a much better report because the use of cohesive devices here is much better than the previous answer. Okay, I want you to print out these two answers and read them. Okay, just make a comparison between them. Okay, now let's talk a bit about cohesive devices. We need to discuss or talk about the function of each of the cohesive devices in the previous answer. If you want to emphasize or give an example, you could use in fact to give a specific example. You don't have to use the for example, it's overused. Okay, you need some other expressions, to stronger expressions, if I might say so. So in fact, to give a specific example, one of the most striking features of this table is, and so on. To provide an overview of the evident tendencies in the data, you can say the overall trend is clearly one of decline. Okay, so you are giving a general idea about the trend of the shown in the visual data. Maybe it's a table, a chart, a graph, and so on. To give a contrast with previous information, you can use however. Of course, there are many cohesive devices you can use in place of however, but for the previous answer, we used however. To introduce key time periods in the data. If you remember from this answer, the first one, the writer of this report kept using N plus the year in 1913, in 1943, by 1963, in the 80s, in 2003. He's repeating himself. Okay, he's repeating the same expressions. Okay, so you should avoid doing this. Okay, you need to use expressions. Okay, as you can see, you could say in the 100-year period between 1913 and 2015, by the end of the given time frame, in the early decades of the 20th century, which means in 1913 and 1923 and so on. By the middle of the century, by the turn of the 21st century. So you have to write down these expressions, okay, and try to use them in your homework. Okay. Okay, so let's look at another example. Okay, we have here a bar chart. The bar chart, of course, represents some visual data. about something. Here it says world passenger car production by area, and it's a percent. It's a percentage. Here we have Greater China. If you're not familiar with the term or expression Greater China, you have to look it up, okay? It includes Taiwan and some other, I'd say countries, okay? But you have to Google that this expression, Greater China. Europe, North America, Japan and Korea, South Asia, South America, and the Middle East and Africa. As you can see, Greater China has almost about 27% of the total world passenger car production. Okay, so you have to ask yourself some questions. What's the most important information in this chart? China and Europe have the highest proportion of car manufacture. It's evident from the chart that Asian countries produce more cars than the rest of the world put together. Fewer cars are made in the Middle East and South America. As you can see, Asian countries like Greater China, Japan and Korea, South Asia, produce more cars than the rest of the world put together. So this is the most important information represented in the visual data. Which regions of the data would you focus on to make comparisons? Of course, Greater China manufactures slightly more cars than Europe, as you can see, slightly more. North America produced nearly 5 times as many cars as South America, because it's still America. So North America, not North American, I'm sorry. So it should read North America. Okay, so you have to compare key features of the actually I'd say you have to find or understand the key features represented by the visual data. Here we have Greater China producing more cars than Europe, and in general Asian countries produce more cars than the rest of the world put together. Okay, and the Middle East produce the fewest cars. Okay, and so on. So you have to ask yourself, maybe take 1 or 2 minutes and try to look at the bar chart or the graph or the table and ask yourself some questions. What's represented in the visual data? Okay, what are the most important key features in the visual data? You have to ask yourself these questions. Okay. Now we have some cohesive devices, and this is the answer to such a question. The bar chart gives the percentage of passenger cars manufactured by different regions of the world. And here we have, although, in terms of, turning next to, respectively, by contrast, whereas, moving on to what stands out is, for the purposes of this data set. This is an exercise because I want you to master master the use of cohesive devices. This is very important. So I want you to pause the video and try to match these expressions to the gaps. Okay, I know this is not a reading lesson, but it's a good practice. Okay, so you have to pause the video right now and do it on your own. Okay, come back when you're done. Now let's see the answer. The bar chart gives the percentage of passenger cars manufactured by different regions of the world. This is the introduction. For the purposes of this data set, the world is divided into 7 regions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, with a total adding up to 100%. So this is the 7 regions. What stands out is that the region of Great China and Europe lead the way in terms of the manufacture of passenger cars, with 26% and 25% respectively. So these are some good cohesive devices. Here we have for the purposes of this data set. Okay, here what stands out is, it's like saying what's the most important thing about this bar chart is, okay, that Europe and Greater China, they lead the way. Okay, so this is the most important key features. They almost produce cars at maybe 51%. Yes, it's 51% of the total 100%. Okay, so 51% of cars in the world, in the whole world, are made in Europe and Greater China. So this is the most important key feature. Okay, respectively, because you mentioned two numbers and you say respectively because the first one goes with Europe and the second one goes with, I'm sorry, the first one goes with Great China and the second one with Europe. So you have to use respectively. By contrast, now I'm going to give you something completely different, the opposite. Very few cars are produced in the Middle East and Africa. Just 2% originate from that area. So only 2%. Okay, this is 2% of the 100%. So this I have to use here by contrast. Maybe you can use on the other hand, okay, but by contrast here is much better, of course. Turning next to, now I'm going to be talking about something different. Turning next to the Americas, a sharp contrast can be seen between the northern and southern parts of the continent. Whereas North America can boast 19% of the world's passenger car production, South America manufactures just 4% of this type of vehicle. Now we are comparing or talking about the Americas, the two Americas, okay? Finally, moving on to Japan and Korea. Although they are just two countries rather than a whole region, because they are two different countries, of course, they account for a sizable proportion of the total at 16%. So this is a very good use of cohesive devices. Of course, each one of these cohesive devices has a different function. Some used to give examples, some used to talk about the opposite, and so on. Okay, so let's put them in some classification. Okay, classifications. Let's classify them, I mean. Showing contrast. You can use whereas, although, by contrast, to show contrast. You are talking about something, then something completely different. Okay, I mean the opposite. Introducing a new point idea section, you can say in terms of, moving on to, turning next to. You can use these expressions. To emphasize or exemplify an idea or point that you're making, what stands out is to introduce a statement which clarifies data for the purposes of this data set. You could use this expression. It's a cohesive device to indicate that some information is in the same order as connected information mentioned in a previous statement. You can use, of course, respectively. Okay, because we talked about the greater China and Europe, then we said 26 and 25% respectively. Okay. Avoid repetition by using references. This is very important. You have to avoid repetition. Repetition is something that should be avoided. Okay. For example, you could say the overall trend is clearly a trend of decline. The overall trend is clearly a trend of decline. As you can see here, we repeated the word trend, which is a mistake, obviously. Okay. The 100-year period between 1913 and 2015, and later on we said by the end of the 100-year period between 1913 and 2015. We are repeating the same expression. There were still thousands of coal mines in Britain. To give a specific example, there were 3,024 coal mines. So repeated here the expression coal mines. The process of closing down UK's deep mines had clearly begun. By 1923, the number of coal mines had fallen to 2,607. So we repeated mines. Okay. North America can boast 19% of the world's passenger car production. South America manufactures just 4% of the world's passenger car. production. So we are repeating the same expression here. So how we can solve this problem, how we can stop repeating ourselves? You can use pronouns and some expressions. You could say the overall trend is clearly one of decline. So one refers back to trend. So I didn't use the same word. The 100-year period between 1913 and 2015, then we said by the end of the given time frame or the given time period. But time frame, of course, is better because we don't use the same word period here. The given time frame, which refers back to the first one, the 100-year period between 1913 and 2015. There were still thousands of coal mines in Britain. To give a specific example, there were 3,024 of them. It refers back to the coal mines. The process of closing down the UK's deep mines had clearly begun, and by 1923, the number had fallen. The number of coal mines. So the number refers back to the mines. North America can boast 19% of the world's passenger car production. South America manufactures just 4% of this type of vehicle. I don't have to say of the world's passenger car again. So you can use expressions that help you to avoid repetition. Okay, this is the whole idea. Mostly pronouns like of them and one. Okay, the number, it refers back, although it's not a pronoun, but it refers back to minds. So expressions that refer back to the same thing you were talking about. Okay. Okay. Now we will be talking about something very important: selecting and comparing key features in two graphs. You might be asked to describe a graph and a chart, or maybe a graph and a table, something like that. Although this may look difficult, the structure is similar to describing one graph. You will need to report key features in both the graph and the chart. Okay, so let's look at some examples. This is maybe your question. Winter Olympics, highest ranking medal winners of all time. This is a bar chart, and here we have a graph, Summer Olympics. So the bar chart is about Winter Olympics, and the graph is about Summer Olympics. Okay, you have to ask yourself some very important questions before you start writing or typing anything. Which countries or former countries were successful in both the Winter and Summer Olympics? Okay, can you answer these questions? Can you see? Here you have to spend, as we said, 2 minutes trying to study you have to try to study the visual data before you start writing anything. We have Norway, USA, Germany, USSR, the former Soviet Union, of course, Canada. Here we have the USA, USSR, Great Britain. The first one doesn't talk about Great Britain at all. Germany and France, and the first one also doesn't mention France. Okay, the second one doesn't talk about Norway and Canada. Okay, so there are some differences. Okay, because Winter Olympics, of course, is different from the Summer Olympics. Okay, so which countries were successful in both the Winter and Summer Olympics? As you can see, USA, Germany, and the USSR. Okay, now which country or former country, because of the USSR, of course, it doesn't exist anymore, won the most gold medals in the Winter Olympics? It's Norway. Okay. Which country or former country won the fewest medals in the Summer Olympics? It's France, obviously. So you have to study these figures, these details in this visual data for 2 minutes before you start writing anything. Okay. Now let's look at the answer organized so that you can understand how it's done. We have the introduction, the first paragraph, the second paragraph, and your summary or conclusion. In the introduction, the bar chart shows which countries have won the most medals in the Winter Olympics. It also states how many gold, silver, and bronze medals each country has achieved. In contrast, the line graph shows which nations. Here we used another word to avoid repetition. We didn't say countries, we said here nations, have won the most medals in the Summer Olympics. Okay, so as you can see in your introduction, you have to talk about the bar chart and the line graph. You cannot talk about one of them. You have to talk about both. Okay, you have to introduce both. So the bar chart shows countries that won the most medals in the Winter Olympics, and the line graph shows which nations have won the most medals in the Summer Olympics. Okay. Okay. By the way, you could avoid repetition by using a different verb. So you could say the bar chart shows, and maybe here in contrast, the line graph illustrates. Okay, some other verb which has the same meaning practically. Okay, for the first paragraph, oh, this is a bit of a problem because now you have to talk about these two charts or graphs, or the two sets of data, the visual data. Are you going to talk about them in one paragraph, or maybe you will divide, talk about the first graph in the first paragraph and do the other one in the next paragraph? Okay, let's see. Overall, the bar chart shows that in the Winter Olympics, Norway has gained the most medals, winning an equal number of gold, silver. Of course, this is, it should read silver. Okay, I'm sorry. And bronze medals. Because it won gold, silver, and bronze medals, an equal number. It has won just over 300 medals, as you can see, just over 300. Whereas Canada, in 5th place, has won approximately 150 or 150 medals. So the first paragraph is about the bar charts, reporting the most important key features. You have to remember that. Don't report everything, just the key features. For the second paragraph, the results of the Summer Olympics are quite different. However, with the USA having won the, now I'm talking about this line graph in the second paragraph, obviously. Overall, the US has won just under 2,500 medals, a much higher number than the other 4 countries on the graph. The USSR is the second highest, winning approximately 1,000 medals. So it's very easy. Actually, if you want to report something more, because there is more to talk about, you can talk about something like that Great Britain and Germany and France won approximately equal number of medals. Okay, you could add a sentence like that. Okay. In the summary, can I talk about only one of them? Can I summarize only one of them? No, you have to summarize, or your summary should include information about both the bar chart and the line graph. Okay, so to summarize, the bar chart and the graph illustrate. Here I use the verb illustrate. How many medal in the highest ranking countries have won in the Summer and Winter Olympics. The results of each Olympics are very different, with the US and the USSR and Germany being successful in both, because the US and the USSR and Germany are actually successful in both. Okay, so you have to organize your report in this way. Your introduction should include both sets of data and also your conclusion. You can write one paragraph about the first set of data, in our case, the bar chart, and your next paragraph will be about the line graph. Okay, so this is how it's done. Tips, we have some tips. Introduce both graphs in the introduction. The introduction should state what the graphs are about. Do not copy the wording of the question. You should paraphrase the question using synonyms. Discuss the details of both graphs in separate paragraphs, as we have seen. The main body of the report should discuss the general trends in both graphs, supported by the relevant data. For example, dates or numbers. As we have seen, identify the most important features of the graphs and do not include everything. It's a big mistake. Do not include everything in your report. Just the most important key features about the visual data. Include both the bar chart and the graph in your summary. The conclusion should provide an overview of the key points made in the main body. Do not include new information. This is very important. Do not include new information or your own opinion. Don't say, for example, something like, I was shocked at the results or by the results. Okay, you are reporting data. You're not talking about your own opinion. Okay, that's not an essay. This is a report. Of course, a report is a type of essay, but I'm talking that you are reporting data. Okay, your opinion doesn't actually matter at all. Okay, so avoid using sentences or expressions like I was shocked, I was surprised, I was amazed. Okay. Okay, now here is a question describing a bar chart and a pie chart. You could have such a question at the exam. You have a bar chart and a pie chart. You have to study, as we said, spend 2 minutes studying the visual data. Okay, here we have country medal leaders of all time in badminton. It's a kind of sport. Okay, here we have China, South Korea, Indonesia, Denmark, and Malaysia. And here the keys: gold, silver, bronze, total medals. As you can see, China has the most total medals and also the most gold medals. The highest, I mean, not the most, the highest. South Korea and Indonesia have similar number of medals, obviously, and Denmark and Malaysia the fewest. Okay, let's study or take a look at the pie chart. Here we have the USA, Great Britain, West Germany, East Germany, and Italy. Of course, the USA has the highest number of medals, and here we have the Great Britain, but the US is obviously has more. And as you can see, West and East Germany and Italy, they have like equal numbers of medals. Okay, so you have to ask yourself these questions. Which country has the highest number of medals in badminton? Of course, obviously, it's China. Okay, which countries have the fewest number of medals in badminton? Obviously, it's Malaysia and Denmark. Which country has the highest number of medals in rowing? Because this pie chart is about a sport called rowing, and the bar chart is about badminton. Totally different sports. Okay, so the USA has the highest number of medals in rowing. Which countries have the same number of medals in rowing? As you can see, the same numbers: Italy, East Germany, and West Germany. Okay, now as you can see, we spent 2 minutes studying the two charts. Okay, let's talk about the introduction. How to introduce, how to write the introduction. As you can see, you have to talk about the two charts. I could say the bar chart illustrates. Remember, you can't use the same wording or the same words as in the question. Okay, try to use synonyms and paraphrases. The bar chart illustrates the country medal leaders in badminton and also the number of gold, silver, and bronze medals won by each country. Okay, is it enough? No, I have to talk about the pie chart. The pie chart, however, you can't use the same verb. Don't say illustrates, because you are repeating yourself. You could use something like shows which countries are the most successful in rowing. Okay, you can't also repeat the expression country medal leaders of all time. Okay, you would be repeating the same thing. Okay, so avoid repetition at all costs. Okay, Now let's talk about the first paragraph. What are the most important key features you are going to report in the, obviously we are going to talk about the bar chart first. So what are the most important features you are going to discuss? Looking at the bar chart, it's easily, of course, this is a cohesive device. Looking at the bar chart, it's easily apparent that China has been significantly more successful than any other country in badminton. Here, I didn't use obviously, I said easily apparent, okay? They have achieved far more gold medals than other countries, but have gained only slightly more silver and bronze medals. So this is the most important features, key features, okay? They have achieved far more gold medals than the other countries in the chart, but they gained only slightly more silver and bronze medals, as you can see, like the same, only slightly more. Okay, this is the first. As you can see, your language shouldn't be complicated and complex. Okay, you have to be organized. You have to use cohesive devices. You have to report key features, but don't try to complicate things. Okay. Let's now talk about the second chart, the pie chart. The pie chart, on the other hand, another cohesive device, shows that the US won the most medals in rowing. Of course, they were a little more successful than Great Britain. Yes, indeed. However, the other three countries won roughly the same number of medals each. So one paragraph, you just reported all key features of this pie chart in just 1, 2, 3 sentences. Okay. Let's talk about the conclusion. When you are talking about the conclusion, you have to summarize the two charts. To summarize, therefore, or in summary, use any expression, any cohesive device to signal that you are ending your report. Both charts illustrate the countries or former countries with the greatest number of medals. The bar chart indicates that China is the most successful country in badminton, and the pie chart shows that here we said indicates and here we said shows. Don't use shows in both. I mean to talk about both charts. Shows that the USA is the most successful in rowing. Keep it simple. This is my advice. Okay. Warning, don't take information from the graphs and just put it as it is in the report. This is a big mistake. As you can see, I want you to pause the video and spend 2 minutes trying to study or do study the table and the line graph. Then I want you to answer the following questions. Here we have 5 sentences. I want you to read them and try to figure out which sentences you can't use and why. Let's take a look. The most successful athlete is Michael Phelps from the USA, who has won the most medals for swimming. The chart also shows that 3 of the top 5 athletes were gymnasts from the USSR. Here in the third one, Michael Phelps won 22 medals. Lursa won 18, Nikolai 15, Ollie 13, and Boris 13. Okay, the fourth, the sports which the athletes achieved medals in were swimming, gymnastics, and biathlon. Okay. And the last one, in summary, both charts illustrate that the 2 most successful countries in the Olympics were the USA and the USSR. So now you have 5 sentences. Okay, I want you to decide which ones would you include or will you include in case you are going to actually write the report in your report, and why. As you can see, the first one makes sense because this is a key feature. The second one also is a key feature, but the third one, no, it's not. The third one, it's like listing the numbers, just giving you the numbers. You're not reporting, you're not writing anything to translate what the numbers mean. Okay, so I can't include the third sentence. What about the fourth sentence? The sports which the athletes achieved medals in were swimming, gymnastics, and the biathlon. Okay. I will not include this one in my report because it's obvious. Okay. We have here the three sports, and it's very obvious from the data. It's really obvious. Okay, so it's not reporting data. Okay, in summary, both charts illustrate that the two most successful countries in the Olympics were the USA and the USSR. So this is a good sentence. So I would include 1, 2, and 5. I wouldn't include 3 and 4. You're just writing numbers that you see in front of you in the visual data. So this is a mistake. You have to report. You have to translate. Okay, I call it translation, but it's not actual translation. You take the visual data and you try to describe the visual data in words. Okay, so 3 and 4 will not be included. Okay. Thank you for watching the lesson, and see you soon, inshallah. Starting from next lesson, we are going to talk about essay writing. We have 4 writing lessons left, and these lessons are going to be a bit longer, maybe 2 hours, maybe a bit less than that. Do your best, and please, I want you to do your homework, just 1 task every day. So for this homework, you might have 3 or 4 tasks. I want you to do 1 every day. Okay, don't just do all of them, all the 3 or 4 tasks in 2 hours and you're done. No, you have to wait for your feedback. When you get your feedback, try to do the second task, and so on. Okay, see you soon, inshallah. Goodbye.